thank you for joining our session. We've been on a journey launching global websites in a common infrastructure for some time, and we're going to tell you about that today. My name is Julie Nostrand, and I'm a senior digital strategist for Chevron. I've been working on global websites since about 2010.
And I'm Tim Lewis. I'm a digital strategist with Chevron and the current product owner for Chevron.com and our external websites.
So before we get started, just want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of our global websites and give you a little bit of a background on the project that we ran to move them into a common infrastructure. We're then going to talk through some of the business value that we realized. And finally, we're going to go through the top 10 lessons learned on our first project.
A little bit of background about Chevron. We operate across the globe, and our communications activities have a corresponding footprint. Our communications and publishing model follows the sun, and so we plan accordingly with our digital presence. Over time, we've introduced new country and local websites. Originally, when these sites were launched, they were launched on different platforms and with different groups. Some of the teams viewed those sites, to use an analogy, as a garden statue of a cat. You could put it somewhere and kind of forget about it. What they found over time is that they had an actual cat. And like any website, they needed to care. It needed care and attention to stay healthy. Over time, some of the challenges that evolved with the past model that we had were sites being off-brand, especially as the corporate brand has evolved over the years. There were multiple platforms to support, so there were different vendors, different technologies, all the different sites. And also content became outdated. So as you know, keeping content fresh ensures it's engaging and accurate, but also avoids legal risk. Currently on Sitecore, we have 7 country websites with others planned, including sites across 4 languages. That's English, Bahasa, Thai, and Portuguese.
So when we set out, we were a central team. We'd managed one really big website, Chevron.com. We knew digital, we knew technical challenges. We understood how to build a website, how to design a website, how to run or manage content on a website. And, we approached the regions, but the regions weren't exactly thrilled to see us because, we're from headquarters and we're here to help just doesn't cut it a lot of times with the regions. And so what we needed to do is really come up with issues that they could understand and really try to allay some of their fears of working with us. So we came up with 5 very simple things we wanted to accomplish for these websites that they could see clear winnings in. So we started off with the basic digital concept of getting the right content to the right audience at the right time. And that kind of resonated with them, right? They kind of understood that would be a good thing for their audiences in their various countries. And we really expressed our interest in meeting what their needs were. So they knew we knew how to run Chevron.com, and what they were really worried about is that we were going to just take our content and put it onto their websites. And what we had to reassure them is that we would make sure that their content was well represented too. We also had to explain to them that we were really setting out to make their content easy to find, not just for their users, but also for search engines. Because if you build a website, they're not necessarily going to come. You're going to have to figure out a way to get people there organically. We really needed to start educating them about the need to meet their local legal requirements. In the last 5 years, local legal requirements have changed a lot, and a lot of these local teams at that time were not keeping up with them. And finally, we had to translate their content. They were very worried they were going to lose their ability to translate content. So we really needed to provide them reassurances that the new infrastructure could handle translated content.
So as we implemented these sites, there were some challenges we encountered along the way. One of them was turnover with content authors. We would spend time training people and getting people enrolled, and then for any number of reasons, there would be a turnover, and we'd have to deal with that. Another was, as we mentioned, we follow the sun with our communications model, so the off-hour support demands had to be taken into account. Also, changing the mindset that we talked about earlier of the website as a project, something you create and leave, to something that's ongoing. So managing content over time, optimizing upon it. Also, the local teams that we worked with had varying degrees of expertise with digital publishing skills. So there might be somebody in-house who had the expertise that was required, and there might not, so we had to train accordingly. The design ended up needing to be more flexible than we originally planned for. And then, like with any organization, competing technical priorities, we don't have a set number of resources that are dedicated purely to this project. So as we work through all balancing priorities around all of our work, we did the same with this project, these sites.
So before we go into our top 10 lessons learned, what happened? Well, the Sitecore infrastructure really helped has helped set up our regions for success. It allowed us to quickly roll out new sites, and it allowed us to meet a variety of different business requirements. Locally, the teams were able to realize some success too. Their sites had been built circa 2010, and when we started rolling them into our infrastructure, they suddenly had responsive sites. So they saw an increase in mobile usage. They were able to launch content in a timely manner. Their prior model had required them to reach out to a technical team to publish. If they forgot to provide a link or some sort of detail, then the technical team would reach back out to them off hours, and it would take them days to get a simple publish done. So we actually gave them the ability to publish. We improved their search rankings because we actually could control a lot more of the indexing and targeting to their specific search engines. We were able to lower their cost model. So moving into the Sitecore infrastructure with us allowed us to offer them services at a lower cost. We were able to improve their cybersecurity. You know, we're the oil industry. We have cyber threats all the time. So improving cybersecurity was a huge plus for them. And we even made our brand team happy by improving brand compliance. So that's all the things we learned. That's all the things we learn along the way. So Tim and I are now going to go through the top 10 learnings that we had launching these sites.
Number 10, use free-form fields. We make good use of free-form fields for our external websites, both at the site level and at the page level. To name a few current examples of how we're using it in the site, we use it for SEO purposes. We'll talk about this in a little bit, particularly for href lang tags and for schema. We use it to run Google Optimize across certain sites and on certain pages for A/B testing and other purposes. And then we've also used it for placing Stackla on certain pages. Stackla is a social sharing application that we use to share in social content to some of our pages on our websites. Then number 9. href lang tags. So as I mentioned before, this allows for cross-mapping content on our sites, both for cross-mapping countries and the corresponding pages that are relevant across different sites, but also for languages. An example of where this was extra helpful for us was in Canada. When we launched the Canada site, the .com site was cannibalizing traffic for the Canada domain, and we wanted to make sure we were getting the proper traffic there. So we implemented href lang tags to help websites like Google understand that the content existed and what the relationship was.
Lesson 8, and this was an important one. We needed to make sure that our local teams understood all the local legal requirements before we got too far down in the build. And we found it really helped to start with content. So we started clear back up in the content planning phase to uncover what the local legal requirements were. And a lot of times what that meant is that we needed to encourage the local content authors to reach out to their local legal teams and have a conversation about what's required. So I have an image here of a requirement that is unique to Canada. They're not the only country that has this, but it was the first time we did it, is that they needed to have a way to register vendors. So if a vendor is interested in doing business with Canada, with Chevron in Canada, they need to have a way to register themselves in our systems. And so we had to build a special page, and we had to be able to account for that in our information architecture. So it's really important, clear back up in content planning, that you're starting to ask questions about what type of content they're going to need that differs from you. The best way to approach this is lesson 7, and that is to keep your navigation simple. The simpler you keep your navigation, the better you're going to be set up for success when you have to meet their needs. So this works not only for hidden content requirements, such as register as a vendor, it also works for translation. True story, the first international site I built was a US site we translated into Spanish. And at that time, we had this beautiful, complicated information architecture with 7 different primary navigation elements, and it had secondary navigation, and it had eyebrow navigation. And when we translated all of that into Spanish, it broke everywhere. Spanish is 30% longer than English. Who knew? Our first time out of the gates translating. So it's super important that you take into account that translation is going to really impact your site design possibly, and design for a very simple infrastructure for global sites so that you can be flexible with whatever their needs are.
Number 6, ensure the content managers are familiar with other digital marketing concepts beyond just a content management system. That could be topics such as SEO, tagging, analytics analysis itself, document structure. Someone new in role may not only not have digital authoring experience, they may not have digital experience on the whole. So getting them familiar with Sitecore may just be one aspect of getting them on board and working effectively. So think beyond Sitecore as you introduce folks to the platform and get them working. Number 5 is training. Think about doubling the amount of training you will do for this project. And that's not just training in a classroom, but think beyond that. So for me, I've worked a lot on content management systems over the years, and Sitecore ranks at the top of the easiest content management systems I've ever authored on. However, you can't assume that all users will find it that easy or adopt it immediately. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is differing levels of knowledge with CMS. So if it's the first time a user is using a CMS, that can be a challenge. I always like to use the analogy that using a CMS isn't like riding a bike. If you train a user and then they don't use it, they will struggle to remember how to use it. So not only should you support the users after any initial training you might do, but try to think of creative ways to structure the training on an ongoing basis. So consider things like making a buddy system where they have somebody who they can reach out to regularly as they're going through. Anticipate tasks for them to do on their behalf. They may not always know what they should do to keep themselves fresh. So if you can anticipate those tasks and give them something regular to do to check their skills, that's great. And then also for us, we created what we call at Chevron a center of excellence, which is a group. It's a fancy way to describe a group there to support users, share knowledge, and best practices.
One of the challenges with us following the sun is lesson 4. And we learned that just because we work California time doesn't mean the whole world operates California time. And we were dealing with global users who would have global questions at 3 a.m. our time. And if we didn't want to get the text, we needed to find a very easy way to support them. So we turned to our internal social media tool, Workplace, and we set up a private group for content authors. And we allowed them to crowdsource their own support. And this became a very vibrant community that supported our content authors. They could post a question there, and someone would get back to them. We also, through the Center of Excellence, set up an expert in Australia who worked closer to their hours, who could monitor the group for us off hours and actually answer their questions in a timely manner. So the more you can crowdsource support, the better able you're going to be to set these people up for success. And really, with regions, if you want them to adopt your platform, they need to know they're supported. Lesson 3. This is really a project structuring lesson that we learned, and that is to build for the majority of needs and then refine as you go forward. So when we first rolled out to our regions, we rolled out with a very simple infrastructure, and we talked to the country that we did it to, Canada. It was going to be easy in our language. And we said, we're going to start basic and build. And I think we rolled out with was maybe 3 templates and a couple of key modules, and that was about it. And then as time has gone by, and as business needs have arisen, we have launched more and more modules that can be shared amongst all of the regions. And often what we'll find is a business need that exists, for instance, in Thailand may also exist in Canada, may also exist somewhere in Europe. And so that way we can kind of start to say, okay, what module is going to meet the most business needs? And then that's how we prioritize our work. So for lesson 3, it's start simple and refine as you go.
Number 2, have an easy to use interface. So we use Content Editor to simplify the content management process. Before making that decision yourself, I'd recommend considering your use case. Some things to consider: your system configuration and implementation, how you've set up and you are using Sitecore, also the type of content you have, how often is new content created, how often is existing content revisited and updated, and then also the experience of your content authors. How able are they used to do that? How easy is it for them to use the different options, whether it be Experience Editor or Content Editor? And then once you've implemented your choice, look at ways to simplify cases or workflows for the content authors. Some of the optimizations we've made is streamlining our workflow. So originally it required 2 logins to publish a piece of content. That was partly for security reasons. So over time, we simplified that. We made it so you can log in once to do both of the activities, update things and publish things. We also eliminated downtime for the system during builds and other things, so it no longer required having to communicate to all the authors to freeze their work or pause what they're doing. And then also we added elements like we discussed before, such as the freeform fields, which allowed for more customization and more flexibility as we work through sites and content. And then number 1 is find an advocate. So find someone who can support your technology choices or your Sitecore implementation and be a champion of it with others. Also somebody who can give you candid feedback and or identify opportunities to optimize things over time. Some of the ideas for you for ways to identify and cultivate advocates. You can, as we've discussed, you can use tools that support that are existing in your organization to support that process of identifying people who could be an advocate. Set up regular meetings with your content authors so you're in contact with them and you can see doing well, who might need extra work, who's going to be that advocate. And then also a professional development opportunity. In this modern era, communicators aren't just one thing anymore. They don't just create content and that's the end of it. They're expected to monitor social, publish themselves, do an analysis with analytics themselves. So this is an opportunity for any communicator to build on their skill set and keep it fresh.
We're still actively launching sites, and we'll still be learning more things as digital evolves and as our business needs evolve globally. But hopefully, with a few of these tips, when you go out to the regions, you can come up with a really good approach that helps you develop trust right away and helps you find that advocate and build some really solid sites for them. If you have further questions after this, here's a way you can reach out to us. Bluehouse is the name of the internal agency we work for at Chevron. Tim and I are both part of an internal agency. And thank you for your time.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Q&A portion. We've got Julie and Tim here. My name's Jason. I'm here to help moderate the questions. So make sure that you are dropping them into that Q&A tab over there so that we can see your questions, and I'll get them over to our experts here. So Julie, Tim, thank you for coming and being able to help people out. Our first question that came up is actually about something you were talking about in the thing about training. Obviously, it's an essential aspect to become successful. Did you find any particular resources that worked for your particular situation that you found were really helpful?
I'll take that one. So the way we handle training is we had a sub-team internal that were experts on the system as it was built. We had them do training in person and then provide a lot of the support. And that worked out well because it actually reinforced how to use the system. And then it created a lot of expertise and kind of fed our center of excellence. So that's how we approached it. They would create their own job aids based on what the questions were. We found it was a little different everywhere. So that's how we approached it.
All righty. Now, on a completely different tangent, going towards internationalization, right? You're running a lot of multiple countries, and like you mentioned, Canada, where we have French language requirements as well. And there's other countries in Europe, different languages. So the question here is around an international site that they have. They've got 4 languages and they have to get them translated. And they're wondering, is this something Sitecore can do? Because they've right now they've got 4 versions of the site. So what do you think your thoughts are on how to approach this kind of multilingual scenario?
You want me to take that one, Julie?
Yeah.
So for us, the corporate website that covers the global audience, we don't translate that site because the audiences are so varied. We've actually used the country sites to target very specific audiences. And so the strategy we took to the content made it so that we didn't have to tackle that issue. So that's not really something we've dealt with. If you look at our country sites, they're they are country sites and they are both in English and then the local language. So that's not something, just given the way that we've structured our sites and the content strategy, it's not something we've tackled.
Yeah, so you've essentially used strategy to set up a way to make it easier for you so that you didn't have to use things like the language fallback feature of Sitecore where it can fall back from a particular language, or using translation integrations to other auto translation services and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the way the question's phrased, it sounds like they're asking if Sitecore has the capability to support multiple sites, even if they're totally different. It does. We have done that. We have completely different templates in there for our global sites than we do for our corporate site. We do not, we don't have a translation tool because we haven't been able to make a good business case for one. We do a lot of our translation in region. And, if you do your translation in region A, you get the vernacular right because you get it right. You're not going to have a lot of debates about the vernacular. But B, it's a lot less expensive than translating it here in the US. So when we take that approach, we really have a hard time making a business case for automating translations. That's just us. I think everybody's going to make their own call on that based on the frequency of content updates.
Yeah, now the vernacular point is really good because English is not the same in all of the world, right? And the way you might phrase one thing one place is going to mean something very different elsewhere.
Spanish is the toughest, at least the toughest I found. They can tell who translated it and where. Spanish speakers can tell what country that was translated for by reading it. I can't, but they can.
Something which is not in the multilingual thing, but around managing content and making it. Did you use the built-in Sitecore workflow? And did you encounter any compliance challenges, particularly around shared content that you might have across different regions?
You want me to take that one, Julie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we customize the Sitecore workflow, so we don't use it exactly out of the box. And then again, because the sites are sort of self-contained content units, we don't share the content across other than the content that's in the footer, and then the stuff in the footer, like the terms of service, the privacy, that gets vetted from a global legal perspective. But if you look at, say, the Thailand website, that's a set of content that is not shared across the other sites. So that's not an issue we've had. And we did customize the workflow that's out of the box.
Okay. So you found something that worked for you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Again, I think the way we use the sites, they're targeting very specific audiences. That's the whole reason why we have them, is that content is tailored to that country. So it's less of a use case for us of saying to try to translate the entire corporate site or reuse the content from the corporate site.
Now, the next question we have coming up here is around the choice you made around using the content editor. So the question is, why would you go down that route? And how does the team know about, where their place orders are, how to add components, moving things around, personalizing, which is all stuff traditionally done in the experience editor. So how does your team, kind of address that?
So first of all, I agree. It is counterintuitive that we're using content editor. We were on-prem for a long time, and we had real latency issues globally. That's why we use content editor, is we got away from those latency issues by using content editor. It just was, for us internally, this is not, this was because we were on-prem. We had performance issues of Sitecore. So we've moved into the cloud, and now it's a much easier consideration for us to make. But that's why we did what we did. They just have to get to know the content structure. That's part of the challenge with authors, and why they needed so much training, is that they had to know the content structure and where their content lived. I'm hopeful in the future that now that we're in the cloud, the performance will be better than what our on-prem solution was, and that we can make it a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, and I'm guessing when you're talking about performance and the latency, it's because you're hosting in one place and you've got authors all around the world. Yeah. And they're trying to reach across, and you don't have a distributed ability.
Correct. It was just our internal structure. It was an us problem, not a Sitecore problem.
Now I'm just checking the time. We have a couple more questions we can get in here. There was a comment about your href lang that you had in your presentation, where you were using that to really help out. Now the question here is, do content authors need to know how to enter those? Or was that another part that you went through your training? You mentioned there was a lot of training needed. Was this a piece of that?
So it was not. The href lang tags we handle kind of at the product ownership level. So we work with the SEO vendor, we work with Wavemaker, who provides us that guidance, and then that's entered on behalf of the content authors. So they're not expected to work through that. We don't expect the content authors really to use those free form fields. Maybe one or two of them do, but mostly we use those fields on behalf of the content authors.
Now, coming down to the authoring flow, we talked about workflow a little bit, but you also mentioned publishing. So you mentioned that the authors are publishing their own content. So was that something that varied by region? Did you have any kind of these people are allowed to do publishing, but these other people are still kind of learning? Did you have varying levels, or were there people who were in charge of the strategy? How did you really organize this globally?
Yeah, at first we tried to adopt a model where we had folks that would publish and then folks that didn't publish. Then we found out that everybody who was working as basically a content manager published, so it didn't matter. And part of the training was to get those users up to speed so that they were comfortable enough and proficient enough with the system that they were capable of publishing. So we just haven't found that there's a real divergence in role between people who might just edit the content versus those that publish it. Generally, they're one and the same. The people that are editing and authoring the content also publish it.
I'm just taking a look at our time. We've got probably a few questions we can get in here. I've seen a lot of questions coming in around the translation thing. I think we've addressed that, but there was one that came in here about SEO. And you touched a little bit on it with the team that you use, but how do you tackle a global SEO strategy?
So it's we kind of deal with the SEO at the global corporate level and then help push it out to the country. So we use that vendor Wavemaker, who provides guidance on behalf of all the sites. And every time we go to launch a new site, we'll bring them in to make sure we're setting things up properly for that country, both from a keyword perspective, but also from the structuring the content and the href langs. So we just have a centralized global corporate SEO vendor that we use for all of the sites. I hope that answered the question for that person.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Now, there's one question in here that was around security. You have authors that know English well. You're going to have authors that are translating into Spanish. Did you look at trying to secure one language versus the other, so you didn't have English authors editing Spanish pages? Was that a consideration? Was that done in the implementation, or was that more of just by training that you kind of managed all that?
I've never heard actually of that business requirement before. We've never had a problem with that. They're pretty careful to stay in their own lanes. Generally, people in region are bilingual. At least they are for our companies. So they're probably pickier about the language requirements than we are, because they can see it. Now, I have had brand managers who've asked to have certain pieces of content back translated into English, so they made sure for brand alignment. But I've never had an issue with a content author trying to edit in a foreign language. We've just never had that problem.
Yeah, and our security roles are set at the country site level. So the nature of our content strategy is sort of the advantage we have, because if you're working on the Thailand site and you're doing English and Thai, that's the site you see in the system. You don't have access to the global corporate site or the other country sites. So we sort of manage it at that security level is managed at the site level.
Well, thank you, Tim. Julie, we've run out of time. A lot of people have more questions, but I'm sure they can reach out to you. The information's in the deck. Yep. And you can ask your questions of Tim and Julie. This is how I should say it. Enjoy the rest of your symposium, everybody.